Aston Walker. I was born in Paddington, London, 1970. I believe Jimi Hendrix's Voodoo Child was #1, thanks to the power of Google. I have 2 younger brothers, quite a large family on sort of both sides. My mum's from Barbados, dad's from Jamaica. My dad converted to Islam in the 70s. He was a Rasta prior to that. Grew up in a suburb of Birmingham known as Shard End. It's quite informative in the sense that we grew up near a lovely park, but like the houses are really grotty kind of thing. The Masons have knocked them down now. It was a predominantly sort of a Caucasian white sort of area, so we did tend to stand out, obviously, clearly. And there's a few other sort of West Indian families scattered around, and yeah, so all intents and purposes, broadly, a enjoyable sort of childhood. Lots of interesting things going on. Obviously, it was the times of youth clubs, and went to local schools there, and yeah, kind of enjoyed it. Yeah, I would say religion played the role in the sense that we're a predominantly Christian family, I would say, but it wasn't sort of like rigorously enforced, so to speak. We went to Sunday schools. There was sort of a local church group where we sort of used to congregate for clubs and so forth. But it wasn't really like, it didn't sort of loom large sort of growing up. But the one thing that I do remember is my dad taking me to a mosque. And I remember praying at home. And I was sort of like, must be about 6 or 7. And that had a lasting impression, because when I went to senior school and I met sort of Muslim brothers from Smalley, I'd always identify as a Muslim, you know, even though I wasn't sort of practicing it, but I would identify as a Muslim. My teenage years were fraught with all sorts of calamitous incidences that sort of were born of me really sort of like, because my father left when I was sort of like 8. Well, he got deported. And my life sort of was very much influenced by the sort of predominantly sort of gang, sort of football hooligan culture, of which I was a fringe participant. Others may disagree, but that's my story and I'm sticking to it. So, and sort of like the subcultures that were quite predominant in the area. Car theft was a big feature. That was a major feature. And really, because I was always trying to fit in, which is a story that sort of, you know, is a theme throughout my life, this whole concept of trying to fit in, whether it was different Islamic groups or whatever, you know, when I later on converted. So that was the earlier. So I'm giving you that background because when I moved to London in, I believe, 1991, I sort of was involved with a bit of gang activity, and as a result of that sort of gang activity, I was increasingly aware that my life was in danger, yeah, due to the nature of the things that I had elected, that I'd chosen to do. And I remember one incident. I was relating this to some young people the other day. What happened, I'd met a friend of mine who was of African descent, and he was a Muslim, and he told me about the Dajjal and jinn. Obviously, I don't know anything about the unseen or al-ghaib and so forth. And when I was sort of living in Kennington at the time, up to no good. And suddenly I was in my flat. My girlfriend at the time, who also later converted to Islam, she just left. She'd come and visit me. And I got this overwhelming sense that the Dajjal and these jinns were in my house. And I thought I was going to die, and I thought I was going to go to hell for all the crazy things that I was doing at the time. And I had to call my brothers, I called my cousins, and They came down to get me, but I had this obsession. Now, on the flip side, I was taking a lot of drugs. So that didn't help. But that was my first sort of like spiritual awakening. And then I sort of moved back to Birmingham, and a couple of friends, acquaintances, they had converted to Islam, and it was sort of Handsworth Carnival, and they were all in their robes, you know, their thobes, and they looked quite, it was just quite an amazing sight, because prior to that, we'd all been rappers and MCs, and, you know, there used to be a club, a famous club called the Hummingbird. Used to rap on there. Been on stage with Professor Griff from Public Enemy. You know, a good friend of mine. He's no longer with us now. Cut D. He was a drum and bass, a jungle producer, and you know that's the kind of milieu. That was the kind of vibe that we was into, and I saw my friends in the robes, and I thought, yeah, you know, this is something that I want to learn a little bit more about. And that's how I became, or got into, you know, taking my Shahada at Central Mosque. The move to Damascus, I lived in Damascus it was a very brief period. It was 95, 96. There was I believe the assassination of an Israeli Prime Minister or President, I forget which, you know, I do apologise to viewers for my lack of rigorous research in that matter, but I remember at the time I'd been a Salafi under the tutelage of one Abu Muntasir at Green Lane Mosque, and I was working sort of in the hip hop thing. I was doing in London prior. Then I'd sort of met a chap on a bus in Small Heath. He took me to Green Lane Mosque. Now, all my other colleagues, all my friends, they were sort of immersed in, I believe, a more Brelvi type Islam. And I sort of got involved with Green Lane Mosque and sort of proselytized to the chaps that, you know, Bukhari, you can read about Islam, go to Saudi Arabia to study, and got loads of people to sort of attend this mosque. And then after a couple of years of that really intense stuff, I just didn't feel right, you know, something was a bit weird, you know what I mean? And then I read a book called Al-Albani Unveiled, and I read that, it just blew my mind. I was thinking, what's going on here? You come in, you know, I took my Shahada with Riyad al-Haq, who's a cleric from Bury, I believe, Deobandi cleric. And then 1 minute, someone's telling you Islam's this way, and then I read another book, and it's like, what's going on? And there was a particular incident. I'm getting to Damascus. There was a particular incident where, bearing in mind I'd come from that sort of gang milieu, then the chap who gave me the book, Al-Albani Unveiled, we was coming out of a mosque, and some other chaps went to beat him up. And I thought, this is a bit strange. I've embraced Islam, it's all peace, and, you know, I'm trying to reform myself and, you know, get on the straight and narrow. And there's all manner of thuggery and threats and bullying and intimidation. So I sort of protected my mate from these chaps. And then I said to my friend, I said, look, I want you to debate. His name's Abu Usama. He's quite well known at Green Lane. I said, I want you to debate Abu Usama, but I'll guarantee you safety, you know what I mean? Because I know the chaps, you know, I know some of the fellows and so forth. And I said, just debate it. Let's just hash it out, see who's right, you know what I mean? Because I didn't become a Muslim to have someone telling me, you do this, do that. You know, we're not from that kind of background. We're all sort of geezers, if you like, you know what I mean? We know our stuff. Same with the women as well, you know what I mean? You know, you've got to respect us, you know? So we want to know the answers. Don't just be telling us about you fought in Afghanistan like you're some big, you know, I don't care about you, who you're killing or fighting. That's Afghanistan, mate. This is Birmingham, yeah? We do our thing. You know what I mean? It was kind of, you know, it's very immature. It's not particularly a mature way of approaching things, but that was the case. So I said, look, have the debate. They had the debate. My friend won the day. clearly he had superior knowledge in the case of Al-Albani. As far as I'm concerned, others may differ. However, good. And then that same chap, his brother was going to Damascus to study to be a scholar. So I saved up some money. As I said, I'd had my son. He was born, and my wife at the time was expecting. But we went anyway. So we went to Damascus, and then I met Zaid Shakir, colleague of Hamza Yusuf, of course. Maulana Riyad al-Haq, I met him out there as well. Noor Hamim Keller, of course. And I was in Damascus. And then I met, who did I meet? I met a wonderful scholar by the name of Sheikh Bouti, Sayyid Ramadan al-Bouti. And ironically, after all that, me learning about this sort of like true Islam, what I thought, as opposed to the Salafi, Wahhabi type. I call it Salafi, Wahhabi Zionism. That's how I term it. I say this on my radio show. And when I sort of realised, you know, there's this difference, I was hanging out, ironically, with Algerian Salafis, because I didn't speak a word of Arabic, because I was just learning it. But these Algerian Salafis would sort of like take me around Damascus, and I'd hang out with them. And, you know, we'd go to these talks with Sheikh Bouti at the main masjid. And then through some amazing quirk of fate and destiny, the very chap who took me out there, Sheikh Sadiq, I believe they call him now, he managed to get an invitation to Sheikh Sayyid Ramadan al-Bouti's home. Took me into the mountain, very humble man, and we had a conversation. And it's a conversation that, you know, bearing in mind, you know, I was sort of like 25 at the time, and it was just the strangest conversation. I sort of said, I just found out that my wife at the time was expecting twins. So I'd booked a flight to go back to England. And then the good sheikh, through the translation of Sheikh Sadiq, Sheikh Bouti said, look, you need to stay in Damascus, don't go. And I'm sort of explaining to him, well, my wife's expecting twins. She's had the scan. And then through the translation, Sheikh Bouti said, make sure you return, you know, just make sure you come back to Damascus. And that was it. And then we sort of left, went back to England, and that was that. Well, I moved back to Birmingham, and the sheer confusion that sort of ensued, having been exposed to, like, if you will, proper Muslims, for want of a better word. I can't think of a better word. In the sense of Muslim society is probably more fairer, more better term. And on returning back to Britain, back to Birmingham, I'd just been sort of working in factories. I worked as an engineer when I left school, worked for a company called Microponents. I was a quality control inspector. Microponents produced weapons, parts for nuclear weapons, kidney dialysis machines. They were chemically etched parts. I had to sign some secret thing, whatever. And so that was my background. So it was very much engineering, which is what Birmingham was known for, home of the Industrial Revolution, of course. And when I was in Damascus, I'd met all these Americans, so many different, Yusuf Yi, I believe his name is, he was an ex-Marine, I believe, of Asian origin. Subsequently, I think he was embroiled in some case in America. I'm not quite sure, but I met him, met a few other chaps. And these guys really energized me, because there were these American guys who had college degrees and all the rest. I thought, oh, maybe I should go to university, you know? So when I came back, I enrolled at UCE. It's called, I don't know what it's called now. So I enrolled at UCE and started studying computer science. And, you know, settling, the twins were born subsequently, my daughters were born. And then I met brother Hamza Yusuf, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. And that was quite an interesting experience, because round about that time, my marriage collapsed. And all the while wrestling with Salafism, Sunnism, Hanafi. It just got really, really complicated. And when I was at university, the internet, this was 1997, the internet had just gone graphic, gone graphical instead of it being like type sort of thing. I know there's a proper word for it, but I forget, but never mind. You know what I mean. So it had pictures. And rather than going to my lectures, I'd just spend 11 hours on the internet. And I was just very fascinated by the internet. And I went to my lecturer and I sort of said, well, you know what? I'm going to move to London to become a systems analyst. And he then, I'd only been there a year, and he looked me up and down and said, yes, you probably will. And that's exactly what I became. I became a systems analyst, got headhunted a few times, worked at Canary Wharf, that was very exciting, then worked at Kudos Communications in Maidenhead, got headhunted, worked for there. And I moved back to London. I moved back to London, and the strangest thing happened was I met a wonderful group of fellows by the name of DEA Project, and got into the whole pirate radio scene. It was the house and garage scene, and it was just the most amazing experience because I'd sort of like earned a lot of money, just was making music videos, started making music videos, music promos for Trouble TV, had one shown on Trouble TV. It was all just very exciting. However, on the downside, consumed a lot more drugs, yeah? So I sort of slipped back into that sort of vibe of, it was just very hedonistic, to be honest with you. And meanwhile, I'm sort of crashing. By the time 2002, the millennium and the millennium bug thing, I'd fully crashed and burned. So I've had my Salafi burnout, now I've had my secular burnout, if you will. Then I returned to Birmingham in 2002. So it's back to mum's, tail between my legs, it all collapsed. When I returned to Birmingham, after the great crash and burn of Aston Walker's life, if you will, it was like, how should I put it? It was a real turning point because I'd moved back, re-established a relationship with my children, with the kids, and it was just quite amazing, you know, seeing my family, the extended family kind of thing, obviously old friends who I hadn't seen for a long time. And even though it was like, and I'd had a few asthma attacks as well, I'd been in intensive care a few times. Well, from 1997, that's just a pollution kind of thing, as well as all the rest of it. And I'd sort of moved back and really thought, you know, nothing's going to happen. It's just sort of like, those exciting days are up 30, 31, 32 now, by now. And then my brother, my youngest brother, sort of introduced me to this whole arts community in Birmingham, which I was totally oblivious to, totally unaware of. And then slowly but surely got back into art, creating music again, getting back into my music. And obviously watching the kids grow and re-establishing those relationships. And everything was really cool and positive. Now, the narrative here is Islam, or my Muslim self, is definitely on the back burner because it's just total state of confusion, you know what I mean? And by the time, I'd met a great chap by the name of John Priest. He was a Hollywood special effects guy, worked on a number of films like Labyrinth, Aliens, and I'd met him 2005. And this is quite an interesting story because I'd met him at a networking event and I was just getting into my animation and filmmaking, and I met John Priest. And John, he's a very eccentric character, tall, sort of English chap, very well spoken. And he'd sort of say, you know, have you got a tenner for electric or gas or whatever? I say, yeah, here's a tenner. And he'd regale me with his stories of the BBC and Hollywood, and you know what I mean, just generally chill out. He's a great mentor. You know, I'd introduce my friends, took the kids around his flat and sort of just chill out and stuff. And then in 2007, he phoned me up one day and said, do you want $5,000 to start my animation studio? And I said, yeah. Then he phoned me up the next week and said, do you want another $5,000 Gave me another 5 grand. Then he phoned me for the third week, he said, here's another 5 grand. And I built my little studio. And by then I'd moved to Winson Green. And it was at that time, because I'd have these bouts of highs and then you have the bouts of lows. And I'd experienced this really sort of low point. And during this low point, I'd just sort of just stay in my flat, just chill out, wouldn't really talk to anyone. So a lesson there for anybody, money doesn't make you happy, yeah? So I was just there lying down, just, you know, very melancholy, depressed, whatever word you want to call it. Then I got a knock on the door, and it was my good friend Nadeem. He'd always been with me on my travels. He was there when I took my Shahada and so forth. And he sort of knocked my door. He was with another friend, brother Ansar. And he said, look, Noor TV, this is my, because I didn't know Ansar at the time. And Nadeem said, Ansar needs some help. They need some cartoons and some programming for Noor TV. And I just sort of got up and said, fine, I'll help you out, you know? And that was it. Then I started making cartoons, hanging out more with, you know, instead of like just dusting around and just being in sort of like a low, dark place, just generally picked myself up and, you know, helped out another good friend of mine, brother Dean Alexander, a good friend of mine. He started, I was just helping him, helping his vision. He's a great visionary. The Black International Film Festival, so which he does every year, you know, I think it's his 11th year, now 12th year. I just helped him with that. So meanwhile, I'm picking myself up, doing some great things, you know, just helping out my friends, you know. And then, you know, in the background, the drug thing, the drug demon's still there, lurking around. And it was around 2011. There was the police execution, as I like to call it, of Mark Duggan in London. There was these sporadic outbreaks of violence and riots all over England. I sort of went into the city centre, Birmingham city centre, to film it with my camera. And I don't know what came over me, but I just went into H&M, nicked a load of clothing, got caught, ended up in prison. So I was in prison for 3 months. I was in Winson Green prison. And the irritating thing about that is my house is only 200 yards away, yeah? So I'm in the prison, I'm looking out. And the weird thing is, I always used to walk past Winson Green prison and I always had this sense, somehow I'm going to end up in there. Because I'd sort of got away with so much in my life. So I'd literally put it, so when I was sort of before the judging crowd, I thought, well, you know, and there was an interesting story actually. When I was on one of the wings in Winson Green prison, and you know, it's all very like weird and all the rest of it. And in fact, before I get to that story, I'd got assigned a cell and I was to share a cell. So I'm sharing this cell, there's quite a large muscular chap full of tattoos, your classic cliche, yeah? And I'm thinking, what the hell's going to happen? So I have a good look at this chap's face and I said to him, is your dad such and such? To which he replied, yes, that happened a few times, yeah, as you can imagine, because I was 40 years of age at the time. So a lot of my friend's sons, I met them in there. So in Winson Green, anyway, then I was on one of the wings and some chap, who's slightly older than me, walked past me and just sort of like casually stepped over and said, it's about time they caught you, and walked off. Never saw him again. So, and it was during this time when I was in Winson Green that I'd sort of saw a load of books on Islam, you know, just to pass the time. And I found a load of books about Ammar from an Iranian publication house. And I started reading them. And it was there that I read the story of Ammar, how his mother was treated, how Sumaya was the first martyr in Islam, which I didn't really know about, that it was this sort of black woman, was the first martyr, was some big macho, testosterone-fueled muscle, you know what I mean? It sort of went against everything that that was hurled at me from the time I'd embraced Islam. And then obviously Ammar being a close ally of Imam Ali and him dying on the battlefield, and the Prophet from Bukhari that he would die at the hands of a rebellious group. I would recite the hadith in Arabic, but I shan't torture your audience with that. But I have memorised it because it made such an impression on me. And it just opened my mind, you know. And I thought, how bizarre, you know, because I'd had a lot of friends who were Shia Muslims, but like, we always thought, you know, they were weird and you can't talk to them and they'll deviate you and blow, all that kind of weird stuff. And the only time I sort of got to understand Shia Islam was after getting nicked for thieving, yeah, and ending up in a prison cell, you know. And ironically, when I was in prison, I was praying 5 times a day. Obviously, I wasn't smoking or whatever. It was just like totally focused. And then that's how I found out about Shia Islam. When I came out of prison, I mean, let me dial it back. The prison thing, yeah. After obviously I went to Crown Court, Melbourne Inman QC. I've got to give him his props. Got to give the judge his props. You know, he made a very interesting statement. He said, and I believe this is a matter of public record, so you can check it out for yourself, viewers. He said, Aston Walker, who was formerly of good character, clearly you're an intelligent man. Those words just really resonated, yeah? Because the thing is, it's like, it was a lot of self-reflection, you know? And then when I got sent down, bearing in mind I'd won a few awards for my filmmaking and so forth. So I wore a suit, right, to the Crown Court proceedings, yeah, the sentencing, had a Quran with me. And I've got to dial it back. When I got arrested, there was that horrific incident in Birmingham where the two brothers and another brother were killed during the riots. And I prayed at the mosque of the father. I used to pray in the same mosque. So when I come out of jail, when they arrested me, I'd gone to this mosque and it was just full of people. And I'm just sort of sitting at the back. And then Abdul Qudus, who's the brother of the martyrs who sort of died, he called me to the front, you know, and I said, look, I've just come out of jail for nicking in the riots, you know. I was feeling awful, you know what I mean? He said, no, brother, just eat with us, you know, this is a very tense time. And, you know, he said, you know, he doesn't want any sort of violence between the black community because a lot of rumours were going on, obviously, as you can imagine, a lot of gossip and so forth. And he didn't want this to be a thing where Asian and blacks and all that whites or whatever. And obviously the father magnanimously sort of came out and sort of made the statements and really calmed the situation, you know what I mean? It was getting really, potentially could have got really out of hand. So all that was happening. So then, you know, I'd sort of come out, no, when I went in prison, the officers, if you like, sort of said, you know, I was on the front cover of the newspapers, the local Birmingham Mail, you know what I mean? So a lot was going on, you know what I mean, from the arrest to like the riots and it being all over the news media. So the officer sort of knocked my door, like I'm in my cell and he's like, you're right, Spielberg. And it's like just crazy. And then all the other inmates are like, are you famous? And blah, blah, and it was just weird. So when I came out, I'd sort of like, the Newsnight, BBC contacted me. I was on Radio 4, Newsnight, what else? I was in the Independent, all over the internet and all that kind of weird stuff. And yeah, it was just really strange. But the weird thing is, the thing that I found really weird is I'd spent all that time being a filmmaker, making films, working on music promos from sort of 1999. And no one, obviously, you know, I'm nobody, you know, I'm nothing, you know what I mean? No one's really recognising me as a filmmaker. But the one time I got recognised as a filmmaker was after I got caught nicking in the riots, because that's what they put as the tagline, award-winning filmmaker. Whether that was the result of my discussion with the probation officer or whatever, obviously the paperwork is recorded and sent to the judge, etc. And clearly it's a matter for public record. So that was weird. But hey, there you have it. I am still doing films. I'm still working, writing scripts, do a lot of radio drama. What happened was in 2014, I'd met some wonderful young chaps who wanted to do a YouTube sort of like comedy series. And I said, well, you know, my name's good at New Star Radio. Why don't you do a radio show, do a breakfast show? Took them down there. Spoke to the station manager, said, look, these guys are young, they want to get into the media stuff. I think it'd be good for a breakfast show. So I sort of volunteered my services because I'm a web developer, filmmaker, animator, to do some training. It's a community centre. It's the ACMC Centre, African Caribbean Millennium Centre, New Star Radio, 98.7 FM. And I got them in there. Then I met the chairman, Alderman Philip Murphy, great man. And again, this is another weird thing, because how Alderman Philip Murphy knew about me was because of my picture in the Evening Mail. And at the time, there was, you know, a certain amount of upheaval, shall we say, as you expect in a community sort of environment, a community sort of station. And I offered my services. I said, well, I can help train, I can help do this. And then our relationship sort of grew. And fast forward a couple of years, you know, I sort of helped with the management team, helped with training, like pensioners had come in. I could sort of help them with their mobile phones, setting up their mobile phones, etc. You know, help with the sales, help with the cleaning. Officially, I'm the volunteer cleaner there, but the chairman does far more cleaning than me. I mean, he's an ex-Labour councillor, served at cabinet level. He's retired. And he's just been a great mentor. And he's really encouraged me to give back, you know. And one of the ways that I sort of gave back was I returned to my engineering roots. And I do a radio show there as well, I do a weekly radio show. But a couple of years ago, I found some papers on UV LED water sterilisation. And my son, who's a graduate of Bath University, he's a natural scientist, he sort of refined my dad's mad professor's scribblings. And then I came up with, and in the best tradition of here's one I made earlier, we came up with, this is the prototype solar-powered UVC LED water sterilizer. So this is the prototype. This is, I believe, I got this from a second-hand shop. This I ordered from China. UV LEDs from China, of course. And I filed a patent for this. And we're hoping, and I put a Bluetooth module on it as well, so you can program it with your smartphone. So that's something we came up with, mobile water sterilizer. And really, and again, there's so much going on in the world, so much, like people need clean water, for example, in the war zones. Africa, people need clean water, poor people. We think this is a good solution. I've had a lot of support from the community, the Birmingham community, and the Facebook community. Esau Ali, got to big him up. Naveed Nasser, of course, as well. All these wonderful brothers and sisters that I've met through Facebook have been supporting this work. It also sterilises surgical instruments and air. It's non-toxic. So that's something that I came up with. And then this is another recent invention here. We have another invention here. This is from, I've got to thank Edinburgh University. I hope I said Edinburgh right. Now this here is the wonderful material called graphene. It's graphene in silly putty, and normal pressure sensors, if you imagine they're 2 units of pressure, I don't know what the correct is. This is 500 times more sensitive. So this is a new piece of cutting edge research, but then I've twinned it with, I'm a big fan of sacred geometry, of course. So we're doing some experimentation with this. So we're hoping to make blood pressure sensors, which also would be useful in sort of war zones and all the rest of it. And so yeah, full circle, you know. And what I hope anyone who's listening to this, you know, sort of gets is that the journey's rough. It's been hard. And another thing that I'd also like to put out there is the psychological damage that is wrought upon an individual who is told lies about Allah, lies about the Prophet's family. You know, I'm no psychologist. I'm no scientist, to be honest with you. But the idea that people can just lie about Allah, lie about the Prophet Muhammad, lie about his family, and think that that's okay, and you know that the individuals who are receiving this information, who are being brainwashed, that they're going to somehow come out as fully rounded human beings. You know, I hope my testimony here tonight is proof positive that it causes a lot of damage. And then there's the legacy of people like myself who now have children who are like in their 20s, and the damage it's causing them, you know, because it's running deep. The whole, as I like to term it again, and I'll use the term quite freely, Salafi Wahhabi Zionism, as I like to term it, it's dangerous. It's infecting not only the Muslim world, but the secular world with the violent actions here, there, and all the rest of it. It's crazy. Something needs to be done. How are we going to just sort of sit back and not sort of like have a care or have a thought about the people who are like the guinea pigs, if you will, of this organisation, that organisation? You know, we don't need to go in deep whether it's Illuminati this or Freemasonry that. No, it's just lies, untruths about Allah, who is merciful, who's not a monster. You know, I didn't embrace Islam to worship a monster God. You know, I don't believe Allah's a monster. I don't believe the Prophet Muhammad is, you know, a lunatic or crazy. Astaghfirullah. You know, I don't believe these things. I only want to have a good opinion about Ahlul Bayt. I only want to have a good opinion about the Prophet's family. I don't want to have any sort of weird understandings or, no, because I've found great strength in knowing that the Prophet loved his family. You know, that's what keeps me going. You know, the fact that with all the weird stuff that comes from like so-called Muslims, if you will, or secularists who are trying to paint Islam in a bad light, the one thing that sort of like keeps my spirits up is knowing full well that the Prophet loved his family, that their sacrifice was not in vain, and that disgrace never touched them.